All right. So welcome and good morning. I'm Kendall Meikenhouse, the Grant Data Manager for FAFCC. Today, we're just going to go over kind of the policies and parameters for the state funds grant to just assist you in the application process. This is the first of 3 webinars that we're going to have this week. Tomorrow, we'll cover our dental and behavioral health grant, and Thursday, we'll do a run through of the application in the Salesforce platform and answer all your technology questions. So for today, we're going to cover the grant structure and purpose, eligibility requirements or budget structure, the application and review process, reporting and compliance requirements, and a timeline for the grant cycle. The state funds grant is a state appropriated funding totaling $9.5 million. While this is a recurring appropriation, it does have to undergo an approval process each year by the legislature and must be signed into budget by the governor. So it is not always a guaranteed source of funding, and we just encourage members to keep that in mind for future financial planning. FAFCC then works with the Department of Health. We're the fiscal agent this contract and distribute the funding through a competitive grant process. The purpose of the grant being capacity building and service expansion for member clinics. The period of support is July 1st, 2024 to June 30th, 2025, which means that while notifications of selection don't go out until September, if awarded, you will be able to apply those funds back toward expenses incurred beginning July 1st, and then all funds must be expended by June 30th. But this is a competitive grant process, so please note that submitting an application does not always guarantee funding, so you can't necessarily plan on those July 1st expenses being applied to this grant. The total number of awards and the amount of each award will depend on a few factors: the number of applications we receive, the amount of funds requested in proportion to your operating budget. There are caps on the requests, which we'll discuss in more detail later. Your application score, and we'll go into how that is scored in a bit. Prior grant performance is also taken into account, so please be sure if you're a recipient of the 2023-24 grant cycle that you have finalized your narrative report, submitted your expenditure documentation, and that you complete that patient services report. And if you still have any outstanding items, you will hear from me soon if we are not already in conversation. Otherwise, you can assume you're in compliance, and I'll be sending out an updated email to grantees, just checking in on the status of all of your reports. We also pull the county health ranking, which shows the percentage of uninsured in your community. Take that into consideration. The Notice of Funding Availability, or the NOFA, is posted on our website now, the link there. And this is your best resource during the application process, as well as throughout the grant cycle. So please be sure to review it in detail. It's going to include more information than I can give you today, and it will likely answer any questions that you have. You'll find all the deadlines and important dates in there, instructions for the application, our policies on evaluating and scoring and monitoring, as well as budget structure. So all FAFCC members with full voting rights are eligible to apply as long as they remain in good standing, which means that membership dues and management fees are paid. And as mentioned before, that also means that those reporting components from the previous grant cycle are up to date. Another requirement is that you have someone who can serve as the dedicated project liaison. So FAFCC will communicate with one contact per organization, and that person's going to be the lead on all grant-related matters. And they need to be someone who's going to be able to correspond with FAFCC and then ensure communication between relevant team members. So forwarding any emails, gathering information from other team members. And then the project liaison is the one who is given a user login for access to the Salesforce portal where your application and then all of your reporting is going to be submitted. And again, that's just one user per grantee. But this person also needs to be able to provide updates about the progress and outcomes of the grant. So they need to be someone who is involved or at least very knowledgeable of the everyday programming and the activities being funded, so that when we reach out for a monitoring call or a status update, they're able to provide that information. We encourage any other staff members to sign up for our midweek memo, where we have all our general announcements, which often are grant related as well. So there's a link on our website where you can sign up for that memo. Another requirement for eligibility is a recent audit or financial review. So if you've not had one done in the last 2 years, part of your funding request must include the cost to cover this with an outside CPA. If your operating budget is between $100,000 and $250,000, a review is needed. But if your budget exceeds $250,000, an audit is required. However, if your budget is less than $100,000, you are exempt from this requirement. And again, that you can build that amount request into your funding request. Your application will be broken down into the following budget categories: personnel, operational, programmatic, conference, and technology fee. And we'll cover that breakdown in a minute. But you can request for all or only some of these different categories. There are considerations, as I mentioned, and caps on your funding request based on the size of your operating budget. So if your operating budget is less than $250,000, you can request up to 25% of that budget. If your budget exceeds that amount, so your budget is more than $250,000, you can request 20% of that. In addition, no one grantee will be awarded more than $250,000, just to ensure the availability of funds and an equitable program, regardless of the size of your clinic. You will be required to submit the most recent board-approved operating budget for your organization, as well as a previous fiscal year actual budget. And we do require both because, of course, that board budget, the proposed budget, is going to include some forecasting. So while you will use that budget to determine that your request falls within the 20 to 25% guidance, we need to also ensure it's not too far off from your previous year's budget and that your budget request is appropriate. If you're a member who belongs to a parent organization, you're going to submit an operating budget that reflects the cost to operate the clinic only. So when you're determining what number to use for that 20 to 25% guidance for those that have a parent organization, you're only pulling the number of your operating budget as it relates to your clinic, no other programs or entities outside of the FAFCC member clinic. But for the required budget documentation that we're asking you to submit, if you do not have an actual budget document that includes just your clinic operations, just be sure that within the application itself, you include your clinic expenses only when we ask for that amount. And you'll see in Thursday's webinar, hopefully, where you're going to include that information. One common question is whether the value of donated services should be incorporated within the budget amount. And while we recognize the importance of those in-kind services with your volunteers, providers, we are looking for the actual dollar amount spent by the clinic to operate. Also, this is a capacity building grant, so funds should not be used for things like building construction or renovation projects, the purchase of vehicles, indirect costs, or that includes your FAFC membership and those management fees. But it can be used for many things that increase your organizational capacity and efficiencies, and we'll go into a little more detail on that in a bit. So this budget structure is important to keep in mind during your application because you'll see in a bit when we get to the scoring rubric, the evaluation process does assess whether you're following this guidance for your requested amount. Okay, so as I mentioned, your proposal is broken down into those budget categories, and you can ask for one or all of these different categories. The first being personnel costs. So these are attributed directly to your employees, whether those employees are hourly or salary. This includes both administrative and clinical staff. It does not, however, include any consultants or contractors, and that would fall under programmatic costs. We'll get to in a bit. You can also include the cost of fringe benefits like your insurance and payroll taxes. The next category is operational costs. So these are your overhead or administrative expenses. This includes everything from insurance to rent and utilities to technology updates and office equipment. And this is also where you would include the cost of that financial review or audit if you have not had one within the past 2 years. Then we have programmatic costs. These are specific to the execution of a project or program. So this may include, among many other things, medical equipment and supplies, contracted services such as labs or data hosting, consulting services, and software expenses, for instance, your EMR. You can also request an award for the FAFCC annual conference, and this is just calculated by multiplying the number of attendees by the $350 registration fee. And this request can only be applied to the 2025 conference and not retroactively applied to past conferences. So while the dates of the 2025 conference are actually outside the period of support for this year, which again is July 1st to June 30th, your ability to spend that award amount by registering is going to occur before the end of the grant cycle. So while conference is in October, you will register before the spend down deadline of June 30th. And finally, we have the technology award. So FAFCC is required by the Department of Health to monitor and report on the grant process throughout the cycle. And to assist with that, we utilize the Salesforce platform, where each grantee is given an access, a login account. And to help cover the cost of Salesforce, this $125 amount will be applied to each grantee's total award as a CRM licensing fee. And this amount must be used for this purpose. So just keep that in mind when budgeting for your total request, that $125 is going to go towards this licensing fee. Just a few final budget considerations. Payments are dispersed based on this schedule. So 47% in late October, 27% in February, 13% in May, and the final 13% in September. So the quarterly reports that you submit to FAFCC have a direct relationship to when the funds are available. So we don't receive the funds in one payment from Department of Health. They're broken down into this percentage. So once we submit our reports to DOH based on your narrative submissions, they then disperse those funds to us, which we distribute to grantees. So please notice that you actually receive the final payment after the period of support ends. So all funds must be spent by June 30th, 2025, even though that final payment is received a few months later. So just be sure to plan accordingly, because your final report does need to show that all awarded funds have been expended and any purchased items are in hand by that date. Also, we cannot return funds to the Department of Health, nor do we want to return any funds. So just be sure requests are reasonable and accurate to achieve a successful spend down prior to June 30th. We do have a reallocation process that is meant to help with this. So you can request a transfer of funds between your awarded categories. And we just take those on a rolling basis between November 1st, 2024 and June 1st, 2025. And again, that's just to help ensure all funds are expended before the June 30th deadline. And then all disbursements are done through electronic transfer, and you'll be asked to update your banking information just to facilitate that process. Okay, the state funds grant application is due Thursday, August 8th. It is very near completion to be available in Salesforce. So once you attend that Salesforce webinar on Thursday, you'll have instruction on how to access and complete that application. FAFCC staff will only be available until 5 p.m. on the 8th. So please do not wait until the final moments to complete your application in case you run into any technical difficulties, because late submissions may not be accepted. And again, those applications will be submitted through the Salesforce portal. And we also ask for the following required attachments. And that's a 501c3 letter, your most recent board approved operating budget, an actual operating budget from the previous fiscal year, and your financial audit or review that needs to be done within the last 2 years. To kind of help with our record keeping, if you can follow this suggested naming convention for all of your files, it's super helpful. So that would be attachment 1, 2, or 3, or 4, and then your organization or clinic name. So once you submit your application, it is reviewed and scored by an external grant review consortium. And again, those are external volunteers reviewing all of your information and giving you a score based on a rubric that we provide. And then FAFCC staff then takes those scores, finalizes everything, and sends all the grant agreements out through Dropbox. And any awarded grantee should receive those September 13th, and we ask that they be signed and returned by September 20th. So this, as I mentioned, there is a scoring rubric that our reviewers use when reviewing applications. So we encourage you to review this in detail and keep it in mind while you're working on your submission, so you know what the reviewers are looking for. Each scoring category is worth a total of 20 points, which is then broken down more specifically into some sub-requirements. And the first of those, the first scoring category, is financial planning and accountability. So a successful application will include all those requested financial documents. I'll make sure the request does not exceed the 20 to 25% requested guidance based on your operating budget. It will ensure budget justifications are well explained, consistent with their proposed activities, and appropriately priced based on market pricing. And then next, the reviewers will look at the extent to which the application addresses the patient population and community need. So you'll want to identify a specific problem or opportunity that the funding will help address, and be sure that your request focuses on the theme of capacity building and indicates the impact on your ability to kind of further fulfill your mission. And again, there's those 4 categories, 5 points for a total of 20 points related to community organization need. And up to 20 points are awarded for the extent to which the application details outputs and scope of work. And the timeline, you should have a timeline that shows progress by 6, 9, and 12-month increments, and that aligns with our reporting periods. Activities should be clearly described, as well as any potential risks and barriers to success. A big part of your application is the focus on proposed outcomes or goals. So outcomes should be relevant to the scope of work that is mentioned, ideally presented as SMART goals, which are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. And with that, it's important to include a baseline for measurement as well as methods for performance tracking. And finally, reviewers will consider the applicant's sustainability. So provide a clear plan to indicate how you would continue the project outside of receiving FAFCC funding. So maybe show how you are leveraging outside resources and developing community partnerships. Because again, this is not always a guaranteed source of funding. So how would you continue your work if you were not to receive it? Okay, so just a few things to keep in mind when you're completing your application. Just know that throughout the grant cycle, you're asked to report outcomes for each funded category. So including those specific goals and outcomes, as mentioned in your proposal, will not only lead to a more successful application, but it's also going to ensure an easier and more successful reporting process. If you're able to report back on the progress made on those outcomes proposed in your application, then you're going to have a more robust report. Some examples of outcomes may be health and patient related, such as improved management of chronic diseases or ER diversion metrics or enhanced patient satisfaction with their visits. Development outcomes and processes like improvements in scheduling and reduction of no-shows. And then also maybe administrative efficiencies and processes. Sorry, that would be where you're talking about your scheduling and no-show reductions. Whereas development outcomes would be more tied to safety protocols or staff trainings and certifications. And again, that 6, 9, and 12-month reporting period, keep that in mind for your proposed outcomes so that you can show progress each reporting period. And speaking of those reporting periods, here are the important dates to note. If awarded, these are the dates where your quarterly narrative reports and expenditure documentation will be required. Again, that's all going to be submitted through the Salesforce portal. So the 3 reports are due January 15th, April 15th, and July 15th. And they include these reporting periods shown here. And then at the end of the grant cycle, we collect a patient services and valuation report. That's only due once, and it's going to collect the data documenting the number of clients served for the entire grant cycle, the entire period of support. It's going to ask types of services provided and the value of those services. But again, that one is once a year per clinic. So those progress reports, not only do they support our advocacy efforts with the legislature, they allow us to show the value that we're providing to the community, but they are also a required part of the quarterly deliverables that we provide to the Department of Health. And then that's how our funding is distributed once those reports are submitted. And we do have firm timelines with the Department of Health, and we actually risk facing some pretty significant financial penalties if we are late with our reports. So those deadlines are very important, and they allow us to have proper turnaround time to compile those reports for DOH. So we ask that all of our published deadlines be taken into account, put on your calendar early. And we do give a 24-hour grace period and work with grantees on any unforeseen circumstances. We understand your busy lives and the many hats you juggle at the clinics. But continued further delay may affect your participation in future grant cycles or result in a hold on disbursements, just because it does impact our ability to receive the funding from the Department of Health. And finally, these are the important dates you need for now. We have published the NOFA. It was put up on the website on July 9th, so it's available for you to review. You can schedule strategy sessions with me from July 19th to August 6th if you have further questions regarding the application or just want to walk through your ideas and strategize about how to form your proposal. Your applications must be submitted by August 8th. Award letters and agreements will be sent September 13th, and then we are asking they be returned, signed, due back September 30th. We owe our first report to the Department of Health on September 30th. So again, that's a pretty tight turnaround. So again, late submissions may not be accepted. I have a full timeline and Google Calendar available on the website. Link is provided here, and that's also where you can find the scheduler for those strategy sessions. I think that is all for today. It was kind of a lot of information. So if you have any questions, happy to answer those now. And I see a couple of hands raised. So if Mildred, did you have a question if you'd like to unmute?
I do, Kendall. Thank you, first of all, for an awesome presentation. Very helpful. My question is, in the past, we've had application PDFs that are very helpful because as we construct our, our submission, it's nice to have all the portions that we can work on in a Word document and then can copy paste it over to Salesforce. Will you have that? Will that document be available this year, and where can we find it?
Yes, that's a very good question. Thank you for asking and reminding me. Also, that will be up hopefully by tomorrow on the website. I will put it on the State Funds grant page, and you should be able to find that PDF there.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. I see a question in the chat. When will the video be available to watch? The recording of this webinar will be posted as soon as the rendering is complete. Should be by tomorrow. I'll also post that on the State Funds page of our website. And Shabir, did you have your hand raised also?
Yes.
Okay.
I have a question. Some of our clinical staff is paid through 1099. Would that be considered as a consultant or as paid staff?
That's a good question.
That would be a consultant or a contractor.
Did you get Rebecca's answer there? That would be considered a contract employee. You could include that under programmatic expenses.
Even though they are clinical, like they are a PA, medical assistant, and they work only for our clinic, but they don't want salary. They want just 1099. And some of the grantors, they use that as a staff salary, not as a contractor, because they're not a contractor. They have a fixed place to work. They come every twice a day to the same place, only one place. They work from us because contractors are defined.
But legally, if they're a 1099, then they're a contractor, not an employee.
I see. Because to my understanding, the contractor, they can work from different places, but they are coming to only our clinic. They don't work anywhere else. They have a fixed place. They don't work from the house. They come to the clinic. They have a fixed hours. It's only 1099. So it's a very gray area for us to define.
Sure.
Some grantors have asked us to put them on payroll as a staff payroll because they do not set up their own hours. We set their hours.
Well, I think you should talk to your attorney because if they're a 1099 contractor, you're not allowed to set their hours.
I mean, yeah, consciously, yes, but they have to see the patients who we schedule them. Okay.
I'm not providing legal advice. I'm just saying
no,
as a
I understand.
contractor, yeah, it would be considered a contractor, not an employee for us.
That will go in the program in our case? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And Sandra, yes, the slide deck will also be posted on the website with the webinar recording. Great. Elvira's hand raised.
Yes, hi, Kendall, this is Ella. I just wanted to clarify, for this reporting period, did we get a link for the validation survey? I know that we got the patient services report.
Yes, the annual evaluation report we've extended that deadline. It's a work in progress, trying to get it put into the Salesforce portal. So you're using, ideally in the end, one portal for all reporting documentation. So it will be coming soon, but just note that it's not due July 15th. That is not an outstanding deliverable for any grantees currently. We have a little more flexibility with the timeline on that report. So we appreciate your understanding when it does come out that we need that information, but just note it's not overdue at this point. No.
Wonderful. I just wanted to make sure I
Sure.
didn't miss anything. Thank you.
Absolutely. Any other questions, concerns, or comments at this time? Okay, well, thank you all for attending. Again, I will post this recording on the website with the slide deck. We have a second webinar tomorrow to cover the Dental Behavioral Health Expansion Grant Program. And then please join us on Thursday for a walkthrough of the Salesforce portal so you know what to expect when you get into the application process. Thank you all and have a wonderful day.